What if I told you that no matter how much you sacrifice, how much you give, how many problems you solve, none of it guarantees her love? That's the harsh reality most men can't face. You could break your back trying to provide, to protect, to prove you're enough, and she might still walk away without hesitation. Why? Because women don't fall in love with what you do for them. They fall in love with who you are when you do nothing at all. That's the paradox. You think the effort earns you devotion, but love isn't transactional, it's psychological, it's visceral. And when a man gives endlessly, without boundaries, without purpose, without identity, he becomes invisible, not admirable. You're not loved for being a savior. You're respected for being a sovereign man, one with a spine, one with a mission. If you want to understand why being the nice guy never works, this will make you rethink everything. And once you hear it, you'll never see love the same way again. What if I told you that the very things you've been doing to prove your worth to her might be the very reason she's pulling away? That your endless giving, your constant availability, your obsessive desire to impress, none of that is what keeps a woman truly attached to a man. It's a hard truth, and it's one most men never want to face. But I'll say it anyway. Women don't fall in love with what you give them. They fall in love with the man who gives to himself first, the one who knows who he is, where he's going, and who refuses to compromise that path for anyone. You can buy her gifts, fix her problems, fight her battles, and sacrifice your dignity in the name of devotion, and still she will feel nothing. Why? Because you've made yourself small. You've made yourself predictable. You've become dependent on her validation to feel like a man. And here's the psychological tragedy. You thought you were loving her, but really you were abandoning yourself. That's not strength. That's weakness in disguise. And women, whether they're conscious of it or not, are biologically wired to test for weakness, to search for signs of instability in a partner, because at a primal level, they are looking for protection. Not gifts, not flattery, not neediness wrapped in romance, but grounded strength, unshakable direction. A man who says, I choose to be with you, but I don't need you to define who I am. That man is magnetic, that man is dangerous in the best possible way, and that man does not build attraction through effort, he builds it through presence. So ask yourself, are you doing these things because they're an extension of your overflowing self-respect, or because you're hoping to earn hers? Because if it's the latter, she already knows. She feels the imbalance. She senses the hidden transaction, and it repels her. You see, men think love is earned through performance. If I do enough, she'll love me more. That's the myth. The truth, love, the real kind, emerges in the space between two whole people, two sovereign individuals who respect themselves enough not to manipulate each other with effort. This doesn't mean you don't give, it means you give from a place of abundance, not desperation. Now here's the irony. When you stop trying so hard, when you let go of the performance, when you stand still and speak with clarity rather than flattery, that's when she starts to feel something real. That's when the emotional tension returns. Because you've reintroduced polarity. You've brought masculinity back into the equation. You've reminded her that your identity is not up for negotiation. So the next time you feel the urge to overdo, to overgive, to overexpress, pause, ask yourself, am I doing this because I'm full or because I'm afraid? Because anything done from fear will only deepen the distance between you, and anything done from clarity will invite her to step closer. Don't be the man who loses himself trying to prove he's worthy. Be the man who is worthy because he refuses to lose himself. That's what she respects. That's what awakens something primal in her. And that's what most men never understand until it's too late. So let me leave you with this. Stop trying to be the man she wants. Start being the man you were born to be. Because when a woman meets a man like that, she doesn't just think about him, she remembers him forever. Why is it that the moment you stop chasing, she suddenly starts noticing you again? It's almost as if your absence says more than your presence ever did. And that should disturb you, because it means something fundamental about the psychology of desire that most men never understand. The more you chase, the more invisible you become. It's brutal. But it's true, because when a man chases, he gives away his power, and not just in the romantic sense. He sacrifices his direction, his mission, and even his identity in an unconscious trade for approval. That's not attraction. That's self-abandonment. And women can feel it. They can feel when a man is acting from a place of lack instead of a place of fullness. And here's the deeper psychological reality. Women don't want a man who runs after them. They want a man who runs toward something greater than them, toward purpose, toward mastery, toward truth. That's what inspires respect. And without respect, desire dies. You might say, but I just want to show her I care. No, what you're really doing is trying to soothe your anxiety through her validation. That's not love, that's need. And women aren't drawn to need, they're drawn to strength, to mystery, to the man who is disciplined enough not to hand over his attention like it costs nothing. Because it does cost something. It costs your psychological sovereignty, your focus, your structure. The more you chase, the more you train her nervous system to expect that your value is dependent on her recognition. But the man who stops chasing, he rewires the entire dynamic. He reclaims his center. He puts the burden of choice back where it belongs, on her. And in that silence, in that space you once filled with over-explaining and overcompensating, she is left alone with a powerful, haunting question: why isn't he chasing me? And if she ever had genuine feelings for you, real, grounded attraction, not built on ego or manipulation, but something deeper, then that question will eat away at her, because the energy has shifted. You're no longer orbiting her. She's now forced to look at you with new eyes. And if you've used that silence not to sulk, but to build, to become harder, smarter, clearer, then when she looks again, she sees a man she can no longer control, but suddenly craves. Do you understand the difference? One version of you begs to be seen, the other makes her wonder why she ever looked away. That's the transformation. That's the psychological switch. It's not about manipulation, it's about evolution. Most men never evolve because they're too busy trying to be liked, but if your goal is to be liked, you'll never be respected. And without respect, there is no lasting love. So stop, breathe, pull back, let the silence speak for you. Let your absence become a mirror that shows her what she truly valued, or what she never did. Either way, you win, because you've stopped outsourcing your worth. You've made a choice, the man who doesn't beg for connection, but commands it through depth, presence, and direction. That kind of man isn't easy to forget. In fact, he becomes unforgettable. So here's the hard truth. If your presence didn't matter, your silence wouldn't echo. Stop chasing, start becoming. Because the man she can't control is the one she can't stop thinking about. Why do some women only begin to desire you when you finally stop waiting for them? That question should bother you, because it means your availability was never the problem. It was your emotional dependence. You were too ready, too eager, too open. And that kind of transparency, when it isn't anchored in strength, breeds contempt, not connection. People don't fall in love with someone who waits at their feet. They fall for the one who rises above them, not in arrogance, but in purpose. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Many men confuse kindness with weakness. They think if they're always there, always supportive, always emotionally available, they'll be seen as good, worthy, lovable. But let me tell you the truth. If you show up for someone who hasn't earned your time, your consistency becomes a prison. You think you're building connection, but you're actually reinforcing imbalance. Love is not built on one person overgiving while the other takes it for granted. That's not intimacy. That's emotional codependence dressed up as loyalty. And it will eat you alive. Now, contrast that with the man who pulls back, not out of pettiness, but out of clarity. The one who stops checking her stories, stops reaching out, stops orbiting her emotionally, because he's realized that he's been feeding a delusion. He wanted her more than she ever actually wanted him. That realization, it's brutal. but it's the beginning of real freedom. Because once a man wakes up to how he's been leaking his energy, bleeding his power into someone else's approval, he becomes dangerous in the best possible way. He stops negotiating his value. He stops waiting for breadcrumbs of affection. He starts building a body, a mission, a mind. And that transformation, make no mistake, doesn't go unnoticed. You see, attraction isn't just about looks or words. It's about emotional gravity. The moment you stop chasing, you stop repelling. The moment you walk away to fix yourself, you force her to see you differently. And if she had any real affection for you, any spark of something genuine, your absence will haunt her, not because you played a game, but because you broke the pattern, you disrupted the loop, and people remember the ones who shift their story. Do you understand how powerful that is? When you were begging for attention, you were forgettable. When you disappeared to evolve, you became unforgettable. And if she thinks about you every night now, it's not because of what you gave her. It's because of what you stopped giving. You stopped making her the center of your life. You stopped waiting for her to choose you. And in doing so, you chose yourself. That is a man women remember, not the one who bent himself into a shape that pleased her, but the one who outgrew the version of himself who needed her approval to feel like a man. That version is dead. And in its place stands someone forged through silence, solitude, and struggle. So here's your awakening. Your heartbreak was not a tragedy. It was an initiation. And your absence, that wasn't a tactic, it was a statement. You will not beg. You will not shrink. You will not wait. And if she still thinks about you, that's her story now. You've moved on to write a new one. One built not on chasing love, but becoming someone worth loving. And if you remember one thing, let it be this. The man who walks away to rebuild himself becomes the man she never forgets. What if I told you that she started respecting you the moment you stopped making her your emotional center? That's the paradox most men never understand. The more you orbit around her, the more you diminish your gravity. You become a satellite, useful, consistent, predictable, but never the sun. And here's the brutal truth. No one is drawn to what is always available. Emotionally, psychologically, we crave what grows, not what clings. When you constantly seek her validation, when your moods rise and fall depending on her attention, what you communicate is not love, it's dependency. You're not building a bond, you're offering yourself as an emotional crutch. And eventually crutches get discarded, especially when the person using them wants to walk freely again. But let's turn the page. Let's contrast that with something else entirely. The man who centers himself, not in arrogance, but in responsibility. The one who says, I have a life to build, a purpose to pursue, a soul to refine. That man becomes magnetic, not because he plays games, but because he becomes rare. You see, we live in a culture that glorifies access and immediacy. You can text someone 24/7. You can swipe, scroll, validate yourself with likes and shallow interactions. But what we've lost is sacred distance, the kind of silence that makes someone wonder about you, that makes them earn proximity. Do you understand the power of that? When you stop chasing, you become a mirror. Your absence forces her to see what she actually felt, not what she told herself to feel. It strips away the noise, the distraction, the social scripts. It brings her face to face with the real question, did she love you or just the attention you gave her? Now, that's a terrifying confrontation for both of you, because if the answer is honest, it may shatter illusions you both built, but that shattering is necessary. You cannot build truth on top of emotional fantasy. You need the collapse before the reconstruction. And once you've stepped back, truly stepped back, not in anger, not in revenge, but in clarity, then something extraordinary happens. You begin to hear yourself again, your own voice, your own needs, your own hunger for depth, not performance. And in that quiet, you become powerful. Not because you have control over her, but because you reclaimed control over yourself. That's what most relationships lack: sovereignty. Two people collapsing into each other isn't romance, it's fusion, and fusion always leads to confusion. Who are you without her? If you can't answer that, you were never really in love. You were just trying to escape your own emptiness through another person's approval. But once you stop doing that, once you hold your frame, once you stay grounded, even when she pulls away, that's when true respect is born. And sometimes, yes, that silence will bring her back. But more importantly, it will bring you back. And you were the one who was missing all along. So ask yourself, was the love you gave her rooted in strength or neediness? In abundance or in scarcity? In honesty or in fear of being alone? Because when a man finds the courage to choose growth over grasping, truth over tactics, silence over pleading, he doesn't just change how others see him, he changes how he sees himself. And that shift, that is unforgettable. So here's your mic drop moment. If you have to lose her to find yourself, it was never love, it was a lesson. And now it's time to graduate. Why is it that the moment you stop reaching out, she starts watching everything you do? Why does your silence speak louder than every desperate message you once sent? Here's the truth. Most men don't understand the psychological weight of absence. They think if they disappear, they'll be forgotten. But the human mind doesn't erase what was once emotionally significant. It obsesses over unresolved meaning. And nothing is more haunting to the female psyche than a man who once chased her and then simply stopped. Not because he gave up, but because he woke up. That shift is profound. You see, there's a stark contrast between the man who withdraws in bitterness and the man who detaches in clarity. One is trying to punish her. The other is trying to rebuild himself. And women can feel the difference. One stinks of resentment, the other radiates presence. When a man stops chasing, not to manipulate, but to reclaim his dignity, he becomes something she never expected, unavailable to weakness. That hits her on a psychological level she can't articulate. Why? Because it flips the evolutionary script. Women are wired to detect value. Not just in what you give, but in what you withhold when your respect is compromised. Your silence forces a confrontation with her own behavior. It's no longer about how much you love her, it's about whether she earned it. And that, right there, is the emotional reckoning most people run from. Because love without boundaries is just addiction, obsession dressed in romantic fantasy. But when a man puts down his desperation and says, I will not chase someone who runs from herself, something changes. That kind of self-respect is unforgettable. It cuts through her rationalizations, her distractions, her carefully curated detachment. She remembers you, not just what you did, but what you didn't do. When she stopped reciprocating, she remembers your discipline, your silence, your restraint. And in that memory is a question that will torment her more than any breakup ever could. Why didn't he come back? And the answer is simple. Because you became someone who no longer needed to. You stopped assigning your worth to how much she cared. You stopped auditioning for love, and that is the rarest kind of power, emotional sovereignty. Most people never find it. They loop endlessly through cycles of need, validation, and rejection. They fear being forgotten more than they fear forgetting themselves. But you chose the harder road. You chose to sit in the silence, to face the discomfort, to let go of the fantasy. And by doing so, you became something else entirely. Not the man who chased her, but the man she now has to chase in her mind. That's the paradox. You gain influence not by force, but by absence, not by noise, but by quiet strength. The man who walks away from a woman, not in rage, but in peace, that man is unforgettable. Not because he's cruel, because he's clear. And clarity is terrifying when you've built your self-worth on someone else's confusion. So here's your mic drop truth. If your silence makes her think harder than your presence ever did, you were never the problem. You were the lesson.